celebrating 50 years of broadcasting excellence at WBXL 90.5 FM in Baldwinsville, New York. This is The Buzz Goes Gold. Hello, welcome to the very first recording of the brand new WBXL podcast called The Buzz Goes Gold. I'm your host, Jordan Hayes, and I'm here with someone who I think was here towards the very, very beginning. Please welcome to the podcast for the first time ever, Judy Rheome-Filipchuck, and I'm sorry if I butchered your name. Remind me what's your class year?
I graduated in June 1985.
Okay, 1985. I was thinking 1979. I apologize
That's
for that. But the first place to begin is what made you interested in broadcasting, and how did you find this great radio station?
Well, it had kind of been legendary in the halls of Baker when I was going to school there. It was my senior year, and I really wanted to get involved kind of in some classes outside of the ordinary. And the radio station piqued my interest through some friends who had taken the class in previous years, and they gave me a tour of the studio and in my junior year, and I kind of watch some of them doing their own shows, and it really piqued my interest. And I thought, well, this might be something kind of fun to carry me through my senior year. And I had a great time. I started into it. Some changes were being made to the station in September when I started my senior year. So we didn't necessarily get to go on the air right away. And when we did finally get to go on the air, Mr. Jenner was really good about us using, self-creativity. And so he was, a great guide, but he certainly let us form our own on-air personalities. And it's just an experience that in some way, shape, or form still follows me to this day.
Okay, and we'll get more into that as the episode goes on. I just want to ask you, so what were the changes? So you mentioned that during your senior year, there were some changes. Besides,
right. We did move across the hallway, and I just know some new equipment was being set up, a new studio. So it took a little bit longer for some of us to get on the air. We still did end up taking our classes from Mr. Jenner, and it's probably in hindsight, it was probably a really great way to do things for those of us that had not had any experience in radio. We got to learn some of the basic FCC rules, like call letters at the top of the hour, and some of the history of radio, and maybe how to do some interviews and that kind of thing. In hindsight, I really thought that it kind of, when we finally did settle down behind the microphone, or at least I know when I did, I felt a lot better prepared than maybe I otherwise would have if, just kind of thrown in to sink or swim.
Mr. Jenner, Al Jenner, had long since gone when I came on board. I was being taught by the Mr. Peter Hunn, who was a professor up at SUNY Oswego.
Mm-hmm.
I graduated in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
But still, even then, as you say these things, I was taught the fundamentals and the basics. So it's during that class, and there were a lot of interesting things that you had to learn that I thought were valuable. I mean, that's your basic training ground. But I also felt as though I learned by doing. So the more airtime that I got, I just felt like I'd become a natural. I'd ease my way into it, and it would become second nature for me, which it was. I felt as though my first couple of shows at WBXL were a little bit rough along the edges. Wasn't exactly sure what I was doing, but then it just became natural to me. So,
Definitely. Absolutely.
was the studio up at the third floor where I remember it to be?
Well, when we did it, yes, it had been moved on to the top floor. Near at the time, there was a faculty room, I believe, next door. And sometimes when some of the teachers would stop in and take a look or take a watch at us kids doing our thing during the day. And that was always kind of it was always kind of proud making that maybe, your teachers who usually are teaching you seem a little bit impressed by what you have to offer during your period on the air.
Oh
Um,
yes,
I mean, that was kind of puffed you up a little bit. So I just really look back on that and just really am. Yeah, I try not to be one taken to pride, but I took a great deal of pride in that.
yes. The student teaching the teachers.
Right.
That's a good way to look at. Were you on the air during the actual school day?
Yes, I usually got in about one period a day, and then I also did in the evenings from about 6 till about 8 or 9, one night a week.
And what do you think was the most fun, or what did you prefer the most? The daytime shift or the nighttime shift?
I really have to say I prefer the nighttime shift. The nighttime shift was longer. It gave you a lot more opportunity to kind of broaden your creativity. It gave you a little bit longer to form an on-air personality, or taking on any kind of a persona if you wanted to pursue that. I just think that a 3-hour shift was much more productive. In a 40-minute shift, you spend so much time playing music, and just about the time you're getting into it, that's about the time the bell rings and off we go. And you didn't always segue out of DJ mode quickly, so you'd kind of bounce along to your next class. Whereas after a 3-hour shift in the evening, um, you just felt really good. You really felt like you'd performed better, like maybe you had accomplished a bit more. So I would have to say yes for those reasons and probably more. And in the evening, my friends were more apt to listen to me as well.
Right, that's a good reason. I never did a daytime shift because I had classes during the day and there wasn't much free time. But the only shift that I did was a Friday, 3 to 3. So I only had a half an hour.
Hmm.
And the one thing that I did that nobody else did during the time, I brought in guests from outside the school, from the Baldwinsville community, actually.
Hmm. Wonderful.
And I interviewed them about what was going on out in the community because you have to realize the station was licensed to be a community service broadcaster. That was one of the missions, or one, yes, that was one of the aspects of WBXL that the station needed to accomplish. So because of that, I actually got 2 community service broadcasting awards. And not only that, the station got to keep its FCC license because of my community service broadcasting. No other show that was on when I was there did that. So that was a proud honor for me.
That's excellent.
Were you alone, or did you ever work with a co-host?
No, I never did work with a co-host. I generally worked alone. And to be honest with you, I enjoyed that very much, working on my own. It gave me just the opportunity to work on myself and kind of do my own thing. Um, there are a lot of different announcers who I do hear them co-host morning shows, and they're a riot together. But you're also setting yourself up for, okay, am I going to get along with my co-host? Are we going to have that easy banter? Are we going to be certain not to say anything that might offend the other on air and kind of taint the relationship? So I really enjoyed working on my own and doing my own thing. I was really lucky in that in March of my senior year, um, one of Mr. Jenner's coworkers at WSEN had listened to me, and I was offered a job at WSEN, which I kept through the end of the year. I kept it until the first of 1986. And at the time, WSEN was a country station. So here you've got somebody that listens to heavy metal going into a country station and um, not knowing a thing about country music, but it's kind of like being in a show. You just slip into that costume and you run with it. And even to this day, I think some people are still very surprised that I worked at a country music radio station.
I know the call letters have changed, but 92.1 FM is back at country. It's WOLF now.
Uh-huh.
WOLF FM. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but I believe it was 2016 when the oldies or the classic hits WSEN went away, and WOLF 92.1 Syracuse's new country signed back on. So we now have country music at 92.1 FM again. WSEN still around. Now it's on a station, a classic top 40 station owned by that same company. It's called The Dinosaur.
Well, that's I no longer live in the Syracuse area, so things like that, unfortunately, I don't get the chance to keep up with. Um, but it's very interesting to note that it's come full circle.
I remember in the 90s and in the 2000s, all I knew was 92.1 WSEN was an oldie station. And I
Hmm.
thought that's what it was all the time. It wasn't until almost 20 years later, when I discovered that WSCN was country first. Then it became an oldie station.
Oh
So
yeah. Yeah, we had one of the biggest radio giants in Syracuse working there when I did, Ron B, the late Ron B, who was just a fantastic gentleman and had just the most perfect voice for radio and did a morning show. And so I was always proud to say that I worked with that legend wherever I went, because after WSEN, and it's kind of interesting to note that for a time I worked at two radio stations at the same time, not only WBXL and WSEN, but when I went on to university at Oswego, at the same time I was working at the college radio station, I was still at WSEN and then eventually segued into WKFM and worked there for probably 2.5 years. So there were several times where I had to catch myself in what call letters I was saying, and you had to kind of be very conscientious about that when you gave phone numbers for contest lines and request lines and call letters. You had to kind of stop first and make sure that you knew where you were and you were using the right call letters.
I can imagine any recurring bits that you'd love to do on air, and then we'll talk about the music and the in studio tech. Uh,
Unfortunately, with just doing a 40-minute show during the day, it didn't give you a lot of opportunity to necessarily go beyond the basics. In the evenings, when I worked the one evening a week, tried, very hard to kind of get a bit of a theme going, as in, just really pushing that. Nighttime, and we've got some awesome music. And just at the time, there wasn't the opportunity for, um, a huge persona that you can generally rely on to do certain things, doing their airtime or anything like that. I think that would have come with more experience. Unfortunately, I was only with WBXL for one school year. Perhaps I look back and think, well, maybe if I had started this in my freshman or junior year, or I'm sorry, freshman or sophomore year, carried it through to my junior and senior, it would have been a better experience for me. But irregardless, it was always a lot of fun to just feel really pumped about working in the evenings. And it was Thursday evening, the penultimate to the weekend, and it was just kind of the TGIF Eve, and so it was always neat to kind of put that spin on the weekends coming, and isn't this awesome? And I just really loved flowing with that. It was a great deal of fun.
It's quite interesting because on my internet radio station now, the name of my show, I call it the pre-weekend kickoff. So
Right, right.
I'm glad that you and I shared that same thing. So between the music, were there any time for any talk breaks, and what did you primarily discuss, or was it just music, and then all you were saying was, "Here's this song."
No, I actually did get the chance for some self banter. We had the fortune of being able to promote school events like games and maybe any musicals that might come up or some community events. We were starting to get into PSAs at the time. And so we were able to kind of work with our PSAs. That really, really helped you improve your on air presence. It really helped you boost your confidence, talking about the weather. And I think it's just when you are in radio, you have to learn to deviate. You cannot be cut and dry about everything. I think really to develop who I was on the air, I had to learn what little tangents I could go off on. And I had to learn how things could be relevant to what you were discussing. And kind of went in that direction with how I did things.
Okay, like news, for example. I know you mentioned like school events or whatnot, which was good, and the PSAs. So you had to live read those over the air. There were no recordings back then.
Not for like the PSAs that we did. No, we had the cue cards. And so the inflection that you put into it, that was up to you how creative you could make it sound. You could, your inflection, your emphasis, and instead of saying, don't smoke cigarettes, they're bad for you. You had the opportunity to kind of go with that and say, not smoking cigarettes. It gives you every reason to go on and live healthy. And you didn't have to follow the script. You could eventually learn where you could deviate and how you could deviate depending on the subject.
Okay, so based on what I've uh, heard you say, this was really a learning experience for you to uh, become comfortable with who you are, not only as a broadcaster, but who you are as a person. Would I dare to say you built up your self confidence during that period?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so we're gonna move on. Were there any significant events or milestones in the station's history that you were there for?
I do remember being able to interview a congressman um, when he came to Baker for something else. Uh, one of our BXL legends, Joe Ward, and I worked on that together. And I still say one of the things that I look back on fondly, and it was quite groundbreaking, and I don't think you'd ever see it done today, was in just about the spring of my senior year. and of course, you're coming on to proms and graduation parties and that kind of thing. And the radio station teamed up with Students Against Driving Drunk, which I was also a part of. And we had different speakers come in over a Friday evening. We really promoted this show. And we had different speakers. Law enforcement came in to talk. Lawyers came in to talk. District attorneys. We had a gentleman that came in to talk who had actually been convicted of driving drunk. And he spoke as well. We had students whose how alcohol affected their home lives. And I think the pièce de résistance and the unique flavor of this show was that Mr. Jenner got drunk on the air. He would take a certain amount of alcohol right in front of us. And as the evening progressed, he got more giddy, and the overall goal was to show you what alcohol could do to every part of you. And I look back and I think now, oh my heavens, there is not a school district in existence that would allow a teacher to get drunk in front of their students, even if it was for an educational purpose. So to me, that was and still would be very groundbreaking. And at the end of the show, the Baldwinsville Police Department drove Mr. Jenner back to his own home. And I didn't appreciate the impact probably until my own children were heading towards when they're getting just a little bit closer to the drinking age. And I still see that as a very monumental event in the station's history. And I just don't see it being, I could not imagine, as a one-time teacher, I could not imagine any teacher being allowed to be, put in a situation like that in front of other students. I just couldn't. And I really thought that was groundbreaking. And I'm really proud of Mr. Jenner for having conceived the idea for that.
Other than WBXL, were you part of any other groups or clubs on campus, like the marching band or the student council or the play or?
Yeah, I actually was the editor of the school newspaper. I was in the chorus. I had done musicals for 4 years. I had spent time in marching band and foreign language clubs. And outside of the school, I was in some different youth groups in churches, and I also had a couple of jobs. So, and I think in a lot of different ways, just that field of performing just extended. You had to have the confidence to stand up in a lot of these groups and maybe introduce an idea or negate a point or something like that. And I think radio offered me the opportunity to learn to speak a bit more eloquently and a bit more succinctly. And so, at least while I was in high school, I can look back and credit my experience in the radio station with kind of moving that along and giving me the success I had at the time.
Oh, okay. So one of the questions I was going to ask you was whether or not your skills at WBXL transferred into other things that you were doing, and I can sense that was the case.
Hmm.
The other thing I was going to ask you was, how did WBXL compare to these other groups that you were in?
Um, when you're working by yourself behind a radio board, um, you are working by yourself. So you're the one that makes the decisions. You're the one that is at the helm of the ship. And it's all on you, but at the same time, you get to make your own decisions. When you step into other groups like that, you're still very responsible for your part in the group. but you have to remember that there are other dynamics at play. And so you have to remember to give equal airtime to those dynamics in the form of other people. And you work more cooperatively. Because there are that many more. You don't have quite the same amount of autonomy as you do behind the microphone.
That's quite interesting. I didn't really think of it that way. Uh, because, yes, for example, I was in the marching band, and I know uh, playing the marching band, that requires you to work as a team. And it's interesting because I did my own show. I did my own show on air, but I felt like even at the station I was part of a team because even though I did my own thing on my own shift, my station mates, I still felt like we were still part of a team, and I had very good relationships with a lot of my fellow station mates, and I considered some of them to be my closest friends. For me, it was marching. Most of the people that I got along or that I remembered the most were either from the band or from the station. It's interesting how you mentioned the dynamics that you had.
Well, and it's very true. But when you talk about dynamics, I think something that just came to mind, I know it's not at all uncommon now to hear female radio hosts. But when I started at WBXL, there were just four young ladies, four of us, who were on air. Generally, the male population in the class was probably 3 times to 4 times greater than the female population. So it was very proud making in being one of the few females behind the microphone for WBXL. And as well, when I went on to work at both WSEN and WKFM, I was still one of about three 2 to 3 females on the air. And now we see where women have risen in the ranks in the broadcasting industry. But when I started, I would never say I was intimidated by my male co-hosts, but that was kind of the gender makeup of my broadcasting experience when I started out.
Oh, that's very interesting. And I'm sure, well, by the time I got there, I think we had an equal number of men versus women. My senior year, there were two co GMs, and both of them were female. So
That's
we've
impressive.
we've come a long way
Yes.
since then.
Well, I still do reach out to some of my fellow WBXLers. Um, I know a lot of it's through Facebook, but I still do have a couple that I speak to, two or three, maybe more, that I speak to on a regular basis. And here we're coming up on our 39th year since graduation, but we're still keeping, we still have that in common. No matter where we are in the world, we still have WBXL and our heart in radio in common.
Absolutely. Do you want to shout those out? Do you want to shout any names out, or do you want to leave them completely anonymous? It's completely up to you.
Well, no, I'm glad to drop Neil Vinette's name, and I'm glad to drop Pat Harris's name. Both, had excellent on-air presence and had the voice for radio. So those are two people that I still probably, touch base with, send them texts every now and again, and just I do remember our origins. That's probably the foundation for our friendships. And when I went on to the Oswego SUNY Oswego radio station. There's still a gal that I reach out to from that radio station, and we also work together at WSEN. So radio does. I know I've watched people move around in the bigger markets. I've watched people move from either station to station or different parts of the country based on their job and the kind of the kind of places that needed their talent. And you still see a great deal of friendships maintained across the broadcasting spectrum. You still see, you still see people that you assume are competitors that maybe would be at each
Yes.
other's throats. That, well, you know what, they work for different radio stations, but they still play nice in the sandbox, and they're still good friends.
Yeah, because we're all broadcasters.
Right.
Even though we may work at competing stations. I want to get to your career. You mentioned you were at WSCN. Pick up the story from there. Give us the rundown of what you've been up to since, including today.
Well, I did go on to work in, after I left radio, and began a family. At the time, radio was a little more difficult. Sometimes the hours, you weren't always going to get the most ideal shift. So I chose to go into the insurance industry and underwriting and financial planning. I left to raise my children, and during that time, I did a lot of volunteering that I fell back on my radio experience. I would often fill in at a couple of different churches for pastors, kind of delivering the service from the pulpit in their absence. I led different volunteer groups where you had to have the ability to speak and to be understood, and you had to kind of command a bit of a presence, so that people might take you seriously or listen to your ideas a bit more seriously. And then after my children were raised, I actually went into the career of educator. So I was a teacher in early childhood education. I received my degree, but spent most of my time in middle school. And as I'm sure you can imagine, being a teacher is kind of like being on the radio all day, every day. You still have to have a commanding presence. You still have to know your material. You still have to be able to get people to take you seriously. You still have to, enunciate. You still just have to have that presence and that persona. When we walk out of the classroom, we're not teachers anymore, but the persona of being the teacher in that classroom is much like being that on-air host. I did choose to move out of the country. And so now I'm working at a food share near Montreal. And every week I do their promotional material on a Facebook page. So I do have to get myself back on the air. And doing a video every week for the store. And so I'm on the air every week. And I still have people, I live in a very small community near Montreal. And I will have people that I don't even know that see me maybe in the store or something, and will just say, I love seeing the little videos that you do on the Facebook page. You really do a great job. And I don't even know these people, but I am so grateful that maybe what I'm doing is being appreciated, and it's a lot of fun, and it does give me the opportunity for the side creativity that comes along with broadcasting. It is definitely not a dry type of advertising that I do. You have a great deal of fun, and I just love that what I did almost 40 years ago I'm still doing in some form today, and have, even in my career in education, still continued to carry that foundation of broadcasting into my life. It's always been I've taken so many lessons learned in the sound booth. I've taken so many of those lessons and applied them so many places in my life.
Thanks. You already answered my own question. I'm glad for that because I learned a lot of valuable life lessons as well. Mainly the commitment from the guests. Commitment was a big one because, uh, as I said, I tried to have a guest every week,
Hmm.
and I was sometimes disappointed when a guest that I had planned for that week didn't show up, and now I have to change my whole plan, adapt, and make the show. The show must go on, and I was able to get it done, but I was a little bit disappointed.
Well,
Uh,
but radio, I have found, teaches you like nobody's business to improv. And especially in the classroom, for years when I worked, improv was the name of the game. Lesson plans would get deviated from, fire drills might happen, something might happen with a child. You might not have gotten the copier to work that day, and so there go some of the assignments. Radio really teaches you an awful lot about improv and making it look like you're not doing improv, it just making you look like you're segueing smoothly into the next topic.
I mean, I learned that the hard way, and I still carry that over into it now. So, any funny stories or memories that come to mind that from your time back at the station that you want to bring? Any funny when you look back at it now? Say, oh, I still remember that was a hilarious time, or that time sticks out to me. I still remember all these years later.
I think, and it's not quite the same as being in a radio station today, but there I can remember times when, and you really got to keep yourself together when this happens, but somebody might stick a note in front of you that you think was a PSA, and it might be something hysterical that they wrote to throw you off track, or something that maybe you think you'd start reading along and they've put an obscene word in and you had to stop yourself, or they might even come in and try to whisper something in your ear while you're on the air just to see if they could get you to crack up. And sometime it took an awful lot of resolve, to just keep a straight face. And when you finally flipped off the switch when you were done, the song started playing and you chased them down the hallway for doing that. And afterward, you had a great laugh. Um, I will say that Mr. Jenner was pretty strict on, you being the only one in the studio at the time. He really didn't encourage stragglers, and probably for that reason. But I still have to look back and say those were some of the really humorous moments.
Okay, and I just want I could imagine what that have been like. We didn't talk about the music, or at least the in studio equipment that I forgot to bring up. Tell me briefly, what was the in studio? Not to date yourself. What was the in studio equipment like?
Well, we actually had kind of because it was installed new that fall. We had pretty up to date technology, and we had they would be like the dials on the pots at the time. So you'd be working with those, and you'd have the buttons right below. We did have a top notch microphone that. We kind of got it to move around to whatever. It wasn't like a microphone just set in front of you. It was kind of on a spring and would pull as you need it. We had really excellent gauges just to tell you, if you went into the red, how about backing off until you weren't into the red? Turn your volume down, or turn this. I mean, once you really got a feel for how the board worked, it was just so much fun to work with, and you had the knowledge that you had the most up to date equipment. I did go on to larger radio stations, soon after, that didn't have equipment even that new. So I really feel quite fortunate that I did start with WBXL when I did.
Yes, same thing for me. When I went on to Z89, the stuff that they used was much more technologically advanced than what the WBXL studios had, and it was a big transition for me. But I felt as though I was more comfortable with the systems that WJPZ had
Hmm.
over the WBXL, and but it's all stuff that you learn on. What did you play? What did you play music on? Was it?
It was turntables, and I guess when you would ask me what the music format was, I remember it best as free for all. There was not any one genre. It was just a bunch of records, and you might have played something as recent as a year ago, or you might have played something from your parents' era. It was what we had, it was what was available to us, and so you made the best of it, and you made the most of it. So you just went with it. We learned from Mr. Jenner how to back up a turntable, and we learned that when you should hit the turntable to start to match up with when the call letters were done. So you had to learn to back your record up on the needle just far enough so that when the turntable started spinning, when you hit it, you knew when it was, you weren't gonna have it walked on, but it blended really well with your station, with your station letters or your outtakes. Um, and you look back now and you say, oh my gosh, I went from that to, and then at the time at WKFM working with compact discs, and it was so different. But in some ways, it was a bit archaic. But at the time, we didn't know that. We were just having a great time.
Yep,
And,
right.
you know,
Yep. Nowadays, it's all computer based and it's
mhm.
automation and whatnot. No, I want to thank you very much for being the first guest on the podcast. It's really an honor to get anybody at all, and for you, you've shared some really insightful information. So I want to thank you again. Do you have anything else? Any other comments or things that you want to share? Before we sign off.
No, I guess, and I want to thank you for having me. This has truly been an honor. I've thought of WBXL so many times over the years, and never realized I'd get such an opportunity, and to meet with somebody who's taken an interest in WBXL's past. But I guess I'm really grateful, as I think many of my fellow WBXLers are, that Mr. Jenner really took a chance on a bunch of 16, 17, 18-year olds who really could have, if we didn't act right, or we maybe said some things out of turn, we could have really run it into the ground. But he really counted on us to be professionals, and I hope we haven't let him down, but I think we had an opportunity in secondary school that I can't even think of a secondary school anywhere that has its own radio station, let alone a man that took a chance on us and let us be part of that experience. And just thinking back on how it's brought me to where I am today and how much I used it over the courses of my career, and I'm still using it. I'm just loaded with gratitude for that.
One thing of this, my final thought. You're right. Baldwinsville, WBXL was the only radio station in the Syracuse area that was assigned to a school district. Baldwinsville was the only school district, at least during my time, that had its own FM FCC licensed radio station. There actually was a station in Central Square that existed. I think back in the I want to say 70s or 80s,
Mm-hmm.
but it went off the air, and it's coming full circle because I've discovered that because Central Square ceased operations on their high school radio station, that allowed a WJPZ uh, to get its FCC license to put that station on the FM dial. So That's an interesting fun fact. There it comes full circle for me because after doing WBXL, taking 2 years off at OCC, I went on to do WJPZ Z89. Did that for about 5 years, and that experience is just as important part of my radio broadcasting experience uh, as BXL. So how about that?
That's amazing.
So one of the things that I want to have people sign off with, or at least is to go back in time here and imagine yourself signing off of your evening shift for the last time and say something to the effect of, I don't know exactly how you would do it, but say something like, this is so and so signing off on WBXL The Buzzers or whatever, however you did it back then. Can you just can you do that for me? Or
Well, I'll give it my best try.
okay. It doesn't have to be perfect, but go ahead.
And so here we are on a Tuesday night. It's been wonderful to be with you all. I've had a great time, and I have been so appreciative for the opportunity to reach out to everybody. And I really hope to talk to you again soon. This is Judy Rheome-Filipchuck signing off from Radio 91 WBXL.